The president has, over the past several days, moved from his declaration to destroy the Islamic State to what seems to be an extraordinary strategy of empathizing and understanding better radical Islamist terrorists.
So if we're serious about countering violent extremism, we have to get serious about confronting these economic grievances. Here at this summit, the United States will make new commitments to help young people, including in Muslim communities, to forge new collaborations in entrepreneurship and science and technology.
To help us understand better what the president is all about here, what his remarks really mean, joining us is Fox News Middle East and terrorism analyst Dr. Walid Phares and Zuhdi Jasser, president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy. Zuhdi, let me begin with you. Did the president come across as an apologist for radical Islamists, for radical Islamist terrorism?
Well, I don't think he was apologizing for the radicals, but he was certainly apologizing for the House of Islam. And what he's doing is marginalizing the reformers. It's interesting, he opened his speech by talking about the fascisms that we destroyed in World War II, the communism that we overcame in the Cold War, and then I was waiting for the Islamism to be mentioned, and he talked about the tactic of violent extremism. So I'm sorry, but the president either takes the American public for fools and that somehow we're going to take on a tactic without taking on the ideology, and if he really wants to engage reformers, then we have to acknowledge that our allies are those who want to reform against theocracy across the Muslim world that creates movements like ISIS.
You know, President Sisi of Egypt, al-Sisi, Walid, stood up and called for the reform of Islam. He is running a government. He is effectively, he's still confronted by extraordinary an economic disaster in the country that he now leads. Why is there not a clear statement to all of Islam that Sisi is the future and that what he's doing is important to the region?
Well, remember, before President Sisi was elected with an overwhelming majority, 22.5 million votes in Egypt, and before that another referendum, there was the largest human demonstration ever in Egypt with 33 million Egyptians. What is important about what's happening in Egypt is not just the statements made by its president, which are important, but what is behind that. The will of an overwhelming majority of Egyptians who have never demonstrated before. And by the way, 80% of those who walked are poor and very poor. And what is it that they are, opposing? The Muslim Brotherhood, the Islamists, the same group, political group that the administration think are representative of Egypt or of the Arab world, and we should be partnering with them. There is a misperception of what's happening in the Middle East.
Is there a misperception, Zuhdi, or is it an absolute perception by this administration that Sisi represents a powerful force within Egypt and the participatory empowerment of millions of Egyptians now under his, what was thought to be certainly an autocratic, authoritarian regime, instead is lining up with Israel, is a positive force calling for the reform of Islam, and something with which this president does not want to be associated?
Well, this president does not want to take on the difficult job of trying to say not only that we're against violent extremism, but that we're for liberty, and articulating exactly what is the American principles and who are our allies. Because even the al-Sisis of the world, al-Sisi called for reform against the violence, but he's still part of this evil empire, which is the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. And the president is so deep in bed with so many of the old guard Islamist mafia of the Saudis and the Qataris and even some of the military dictators. The new future.
You just named our leading allies in the coalition in the war against terror. You're a purist tonight.
Well, it's not purism. It's the fact that the future is, if you look, the secularists.
I have no problem with purism.
Well, that's the short-term military problem. The ISISes of the world come out of the Assad regimes, the Saddam Husseins, the Mubaraks, and the al-Sisis. And right now, Tunisia had a secular party that displaced the Islamist Nahda in their democratic methods. So there are green revolutions in Iran. That's the future of a democratic Middle East that will finally be a solution for the long-term solution of terrorism rather than the short-term whack-a-mole program of these military approaches to radical Islam.
You know, Zudi mentions, Waleed, the whack-a-mole tactics of the administration, of many in the coalition. But the reality is there is no strategy to deal with radical Islamist terrorism. There is a lot of lip service. We have the former Secretary of State calling for greater empathy and understanding of our enemy, when we've been at war with that enemy now, outright war, for 13 years, full years and more. And this president has been in office for 6 years leading that war, and suddenly today is talking in abstractions and other words that could be brought to bear on his language. It's sophistry, and it's specious, and it's irrelevant to what is the threat that confronts Western civilization, is it not?
Well, I think the president, the administration, their advisors are only but reflecting what the academic elite in this country has been pushing for, even the entire war. Since 9/11 till now, even the wars they've conducted, the wars to end wars, are not considered as legitimate. They consider that the real partners are the Islamists or the Iranian regime, and that's how they're going to end those wars, not actually engage in more confrontations with the ideology that is jihadism.
Waleed Phares, Zudi Jasser, gentlemen, thank you very much for better helping us understand at least the language of the challenges this nation and the West face. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.